Okay, now we'll talk a little bit about what is the real plyometrics. And I say real because I want to go back to what Yuri Verkhoshansky developed or created in the former Soviet Union. This was the beginning of what we now know as plyometrics.
영상을 보시기에 앞서 플라이오메트릭의 기원에 대해 잠깐 알아보겠습니다. 먼저 플라이오메트릭은 1960년대 후반과 70년대 초반 소련의 스포츠 과학자이자 코치였던 유리 베르코샨스키 박사가 창안을 했는데 이때는 이 트레이닝을 쇼크 메소드라고 불렀습니다. 당시 미국의 육상 코치였던 프레드 웨이트는 육상 경기 전 워밍업에서 러시아 선수들이 이런 점프를 하는 것을 보고 플라이오메트릭이라는 용어를 만들어냈다고 합니다. 영상 속의 박사님은 마이클 예시스라는 분으로 1980년대 베르코샨스키 박사와 함께 일했고 미국의 이 베르코샨스키 박사의 쇼크 메소드를 소개하신 분으로 그 후 프레드 웨이트가 마이클 예시스 박사가 하는 일에 대해 알게 되었고 팀을 이뤄 플라이오메트릭에 대한 정보를 전파해 점차 미국에 퍼져나갔다고 합니다. 그래서 영상 속 마이클 예시스 박사가 하시는 말씀은 현재 플라이오메트릭이라는 용어가 널리 사용되고 인기를 끌면서 베르코샨스키 박사가 개발한 본래의 플라이오메트릭 쇼크 메소드의 진정한 의미는 대부분 잊혀져 현재 널리 퍼진 트레이닝과는 구분할 필요가 있다고 말씀하고 계십니다.
What we call plyometrics today is really simply jump exercises everybody comes up with. In fact, the other day I read an article. It was called Plyometrics for the Upper Body. And they were just doing some slow push-ups or stepping from a step and going up and down, but nothing that even resembled any kind of a jump. So everything is being called plyometrics. So because of that, we have to separate what is the real plyometrics. What did Verkhoshansky create initially that we are not doing for the most part today? And I think this is what I call the true explosive plyometrics. Now let's take a look at the difference between the two. In explosive plyometrics, or what Dr. Verkhoshansky created, he looked at what happens to the body in our various sports. For example, a runner, when his foot's coming in contact with the ground, as soon as it hits the ground, there's a major impact. The foot hits the ground. It's a hit. There's a lot of shock to it. And that's where he came up with these terms, the hit method or the shock method, because the body undergoes a shock. When you're jumping off something, you're up on a height, let's say 6 feet high, and you jump down. As soon as you hit the ground, that's a major shock to the body. So he looked at this and said, okay, now this is what happens in sports. We first have this shock, and then a rebound movement. So, for example, going back to running again, after the foot hits the ground, it comes off. So that motion of hitting the ground and then coming off in the shortest amount of time is the key to the true plyometrics.
마이크 예시스 박사님이 말씀하시는 본래의 플라이오메트릭에 대해 설명을 듣기 전에 이 플라이오메트릭의 원리에 대해 잠깐 소개해드리겠습니다. 플라이오메트릭 트레이닝은 먼저 근육이 늘어나면서 힘을 발휘하는 편심성 수축을 사용한 후 늘어난 근육이 다시 빠르게 동심성 수축을 하는 스트레치 쇼트닝 사이클을 활용합니다. 이와 관련돼서 작용하는 근방추와 골직원 기관에 대해 이전에 자세하게 소개해드렸었는데요. 위 링크된 영상을 보고 오시면 이해가 더 쉬우실 겁니다. 뎁스 점프 동작을 예를 들어 보겠습니다. 먼저 바닥에 착지하면서 근육이 빠르게 늘어나는 이 구간을 이제 이센트릭, 편심 단계라고 합니다. 그리고 이제 다음 단계인 아모티제이션, 삼각 단계로 들어섭니다. 방금 전 말씀드렸던 편심성 스트레칭이 중단된 후 다음 단계인 동심적 근육 활동이 시작될 때까지의 시간을 말합니다. 이 단계는 플라이오메트릭 트레이닝의 핵심으로 삼각 단계가 짧을수록 저장된 에너지가 전환돼서 효율적으로 사용되기 때문에 플라이오메트릭 운동이 더 효과적이고 강력해지게 되는 겁니다. 삼각 단계가 지연되면 저장된 에너지가 열로 낭비되고 신장 반사가 활성화되지 않으며 결과적으로 동심성 수축의 긍정적인 작업이 효과적이지 않게 됩니다. 그래서 플라이오메트릭 훈련의 주요 목표 중 하나는 반등까지의 시간을 줄이는 것입니다. 이제 마지막 컨센트릭, 동심성 단계입니다. 늘어난 근육이 다시 빠르게 단축되며 실제로 파워를 생산해내는 단계입니다. 플라이오메트릭의 이 마지막 단계는 미리 늘어난 근육 탄성의 특성을 활용하는 생체역학적 반응을 포함한 많은 상호작용의 결과입니다. 이제 이 플라이오메트릭의 세 가지 단계와 원리가 이해되셨다면 마이크 예시스 박사님의 설명을 다시 들어보겠습니다.
And if we use the example of the runner, the sprinter, his foot is in contact with the ground all of 1/10 or less seconds. 1/10 of a second or less. I mean, you just about blink your eye and that's it. That's how fast it is. But there's a major force when that foot hits the ground. And there's a major force when the foot leaves the ground. So this is the key to the plyometrics. When he saw this, he said, how can I duplicate this in training? This is what happens in sports. How can we then duplicate it or come close to duplicating it? So the plyometrics was developed really as a specialized exercise to prepare the athlete for explosive movements. But it has to involve this quick force or shock to the body, because as soon as the body receives this shock, it undergoes an involuntary contraction. You don't even have to think about it, it's going to happen. The muscles and tendons automatically go into contraction to stop you from collapsing on the ground. They withstand these forces on a landing. And as they withstand these forces, the energy that's involved is stored in a ligament and tendon. Not the ligament, the tendons and muscle. A little bit in a ligament too. And then the stored energy is given back in the push-off or then return movement. Now all of this happens very, very quickly. So that's why even though the sprinter executes the movement in less than 1/10 of a second, the ground contact and takeoff, we can't, as in our training, duplicate this. It happens too fast. See, in all of our sports, the actions, the things that happen in execution of the sport very often cannot be duplicated by the body in training. But we try and come as close as possible to duplicating whatever it is. So therefore this plyometrics came about, where we can execute these movements in about 1/1500 to 2/10 of a second. So it's a little bit slower, but not that much. And this type of training still relates to improving the push-off, let's say in running or in some other activity. I read many sources, they talk about absorbing the forces on landing. You don't want to absorb them. Absorb means the forces are now gone, they're liquidated. Now if you want to jump down and have a nice safe landing with no injury, then you want to absorb the forces. Let's say if you were jumping down from a high height and you weren't going to bounce up again, and you knew, hey, this is really too high, then you want to go all the way down and go into a roll. Now we're dissipating all of the energy. See, we need that distance over which to dissipate it. But in plyometrics, or the true explosive plyometrics, we don't want this dissipation of forces. We want accumulation of forces. And then we want to give back the forces in the push-off. That's the key. And this is now true plyometrics. This is what was intended by Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky. And this is what I have really expounded on in my book, Explosive Plyometrics. So you can develop explosive power in just about any part of the body. So depending upon your sport, and sometimes the sport requires explosive power in more than one place. So then you can do a combination of exercises. And this will really make a tremendous difference. But don't confuse this explosive type plyometrics that I'm describing with what everybody else calls plyometrics today. Simple little jumping, hopping, and skipping and whatnot. This is not plyometrics. But the word is already here. So I'm not going to fight it and say, hey, that's not plyometrics. It's accepted, this is plyometrics. Now let's separate it. In true explosive plyometrics, this is really the shock or impact method. So let's keep that, keep those two in mind. When you hear the term true or explosive plyometrics, you're now dealing with the impact or the shock method. The true method developed by Dr. Verkhoshansky. See, and this is why he doesn't want to be known as the father of plyometrics, because he didn't espouse or promote just any little old jump or whatever as plyometrics. It had to be the impact or hit method. This is true plyometrics. Now here, if we take a look, Josh is standing on a 12-inch box. This is a good way to start with most athletes. They learn the technique, and then when you gradually build up the height to get more of the explosive or the impact or the shock, to develop the quick transition between that eccentric contraction on landing and a concentric on takeoff. Okay, so now we'll take a look at it, Josh. All you have to do, toes are on the edge of the box. You step out and drop down. Notice I said you don't jump out. There's no jumping here. You step out and drop straight down. You want to be going vertically. And then when you take off and jump, you want to be coming up vertically. Okay, so step off, drop down. Good. Way to go. So you can see he's got good explosive fibers. He's getting up in the air then. Let's do a couple more just to kind of get it solidified. Okay, you land a little bit too far out in front. See, make sure the takeoff is vertical. Okay, he has a tendency of moving forward a little bit, but if you're a runner or other kind of an athlete, that's fine. You don't have to be completely vertical. But the more vertical you are, then the more we get the reaction from straight down to straight up. But the ankles can come a little bit later. All right, now that was excellent. Okay, one more, and then we're going to move the height up a little bit. Good.